My name's Scott Mills. I was a dual language teacher for 5 years. My first year in the classroom, I walked into the classroom. I had come out of a teacher prep program, and I did exactly what they told me to do, which was set up a cafe. I set up cute little reading corners in my room. I had pretty posters on the walls, and I took my shoes off because I wanted to be more relatable. None of this helped my kids reading. My principal came in, who was not literacy background, he was a math educator in middle school, came into my classroom and said, there's something wrong with the mojo in your classroom, and you better figure it out or you're not going to be teaching here for very long. So I went home in tears because I was this idealist and I had my own ideas of what reading was, that I had received my training and I was implementing that. So I went home, but I just got lucky, to be honest. I had a literacy coach in the building that came in and pushed me every single day, side-by-side coaching, gave me information. I was videotaping all of my lessons, so I would teach during the day, have that interruption during the day, constantly changing what I was doing. I would go home, rewatch the videotapes while I was cooking my spaghetti. American spaghetti, not the same as Italian spaghetti I learned this summer. So gradually, I started to learn about the science of reading. Louisa Moats, Tim Shanahan, started reading all of these great articles from great presenters and great speakers. I was watching their conferences on YouTube and really starting to implement sort of these practices in my classroom. I learned how to manage a classroom and I had more success. I went from balanced literacy. I started teaching using Kathy Grace's phoneme grapheme mapping, which is basically isolating letters and sounds. I had more success with my students on my state test scores, and my students did do better using phonics or some subset of phonics as opposed to whole language. That is the reading wars, which I'll briefly mention it today. From there, I got better and I came across a blog, Gina Cook. I started reading that. I started taking classes and learning more about specifically the writing system and specifically spelling. And I came to some more generalizations. So we're going to be talking about that today. I watch a lot of Netflix. I was watching Bill Nye and he was talking about science, which is, what is science? But he came, in his Netflix presentation, he came across this guy, Chad Myers, who was a CNN meteorologist, and he had been saying on air, there's no such thing as climate change, there's no such thing as climate change. I don't care about climate change, but Bill Nye was talking about how he read this change of this guy's heart. He apparently changed his mind on some things. And so he had this quote, had I flip-flopped, that is what it would have been called in politics, but in science, it's called an evolution of understanding. And what I really liked about it is that Bill Nye was applauding this guy because he had changed his mind. Too often, a change in your perspective or a change in your mind immediately means that you're flip-flopping to the other side. If you were phonics and you're not phonics anymore, now you're whole language. If you're not whole language anymore, now you're phonics. And it's this pro-con thing that it really doesn't make sense. And I love that Mark was talking about how much deeper that is than just one side or the other, because it is more complex than that. So before we begin, I always do this. I do this at the beginning of every year with my students. I just want you to think in your head or write 3 words down. What do you think English spelling is? So right now, if you have your answer, what do you think of when you think of English spelling? Go ahead and turn to your shoulder partner and have that conversation. Okay, go ahead and fall quiet. We'll go ahead and fall quiet. And this is very typical of a classroom. Your students need time to discuss, so you give them that time. Let them finish their conversations. They're not shouting out. They're not interrupting you. They need time to practice and use that language. We talk about language experience. This is a part of that language experience. You can structure those language experiences for your students. If you need a more scaffolded frame, you use a more scaffolded frame, but always providing those frames to structure those talks. At this point in a classroom, I might have dipped in with my most struggling students to talk to them, ask them, prepared them, put a red dot, said, okay, are you comfortable talking out in the class? If no, let's practice some more. Let's get them comfortable so that they are ready to take that role of speaking out in front of the class. Never making them uncomfortable by just calling them out. Okay, so now you have those ideas of English spelling in your head. I hope that I can change those today. And I have 2 hours worth of work and about an hour to speak, so I am going to sort of move past the morphology piece today and focus more on the etymology, which is sort of the forgotten structure of orthography. So English spelling includes patterns to be discovered, not necessarily memorized. And it includes structures that can be studied and understood, much the same way that we study the stars, or that scientists study rocks, or that scientists or mathematicians study numbers, or that musicians study music. The way that I study spelling, or the way that I use spelling, is through this framework, which is through Real Spelling. I will give you the website at the end. This is a framework for orthography. It does not start with phonology. I don't start with speech. I start with morphology, constructing meaning from units that construct meaning. Then we go to etymology, and then I address phoneme grapheme correspondences or orthographic phonology. Okay? So it's a different order. Okay, I do this through 4 questions. First question, this is based on Pete Bowers' work. Nothing that I'm presenting is my own work. I didn't invent anything. I read a lot and I steal a lot. So I start with question 1, what does the word mean? Then it's how is the word built? That's the morphology. What are its relatives? That's the etymology, which we're going to talk about today. And what aspects of phonology impact the meaning? That's the speech part. Okay, now I'm going to skip. I have a whole thing on morphology, and I'm going to go ahead and skip through to etymology now so we can get to those pieces. What is etymology? Good question. Etymology is the history of a word. It can be the denotation of a word family. For example, if I have the word instruction, my base element, struct, struct, has a denotation build. Any word built with that base element will have something to do, some element of semantics or meaning that has to do with building. If I'm constructing something, I'm building with something to make something bigger. If I'm destruction, has to do with tearing it apart or unbuilding or debuilding. Okay? It answers the questions, where did the word come from? Did it come from Greek? Did it come from Latin? Did it have a French influence? Did it come from a Germanic language? And it answers the question, what is its story? Okay? The resource that I use for this, the number 1 resource I use, and I've done it pretty constantly throughout this conference, is I sit on Etym Online and I'm looking at words because I want to know the connections between words. The reason that I use the Etym Online, the online etymology dictionary, is because when you go to the sources and you look at all the list of dictionaries that he used to compile the dictionary, those sources are all the sources I would have to look through anyways. Barnhart, Ido, all of these dictionaries are all compiled, and what he did is he basically summarized all of these great resources into a clear, concise picture. Okay, why is etymology even important? Why should we even consider etymology? Well, it's one of the 3 structural frameworks informing orthography. It clarifies the identity of morphemes. If you're not sure what a morpheme is and it doesn't have any history to it, it might not be a morpheme. And morphemes are those pieces that we use to construct meaning. That doesn't necessarily mean that a morpheme is going to have a definition behind it, which is what we typically think of in education. Well, if meaning, it has to have a definition. No, morphemes construct meaning. And finally, it accounts for patterns that phonology alone cannot account for. Here's my example. Why is they spelled with an EY instead of an AY. And I want you to think about that speech to print. If it's always pronounced they, like play and day, why don't we spell it with an AY? I've definitely heard some interesting theories. What we're going to do, we're going to use science. This is science, right? We can hypothesize all day about this. But let's take it through the 4 questions and just see what happens. What is they? If we look at question number 1, what does it mean? It's a third person plural pronoun. Okay, not much there for the spelling. It's a free base. If we look at the morphology, there's one morpheme, T-H-E-Y. I can't break apart. There's no affixes on there that I can pull off to give me more meaning, to construct more. So T-H-E-Y is spelled T-H-E-Y. Morphology is not helping me with that E-Y. If I just pronounce it, and I look at phonology first, if I just look at the way it's pronounced, that also doesn't help me because I still have they, and the phoneme is still that vowel glide, A-E. So that doesn't really help me. But if I look at the etymology, if I see those connections to other words, it's related to them and their. That E is preserved in the connection to its etymological family. It's in a word family. This is the change of heart that I've had. I don't see the written language as the same as the spoken language. They are connected. I don't want to say that they're not connected because there are connections. But print does not represent speech. To me, print represents meaning. The picture of the horse at the Lascaux Caves, to me, that was them writing meaning. They were painting the world. I had a chance to visit. What an amazing place that is in France. But if you look at what they were trying to do throughout the whole caves, they're painting the world around them, their understanding of the world. So to me, that is writing, a form of writing, a form of expressing communication, but also a form of representing meaning, the meaningful structures. So our alphabet has evolved over thousands of years with aspects of speech, but it doesn't alone represent speech. We have to consider meaning. And when I say meaning, people think, oh, whole language. No. I'm not guessing at whole words. I'm analyzing the internal substructures of words. Okay, let's define our terms. So what is a cognate or a related word? Here is the definition that I've taken from education, and we'll see some gaps here. Words in 2 languages that share similar meaning, spelling, and pronunciation. I've highlighted in red where I think that there's a disconnect between education's definition and a linguistic definition. Words, similar meaning, spelling and pronunciation. Here's a linguistics definition, and we'll compare. So languages, words, etc. Okay, so more than just words. We can have languages that are cognate, Spanish, French, Italian. Those are our Romance languages. Also Romanian is in there. That have developed from a common ancestor. The common ancestor of Spanish, French, Italian, Romanian, Latin. They all derive from Latin. Okay? We have similar meaning. I'm not sure what similar meaning means. It's sort of nondescript. Are they talking about the meaning of the word today? The connotation? Are they talking about the meaning of the word 100 years ago? 1,000 years ago? What are we talking about? And then spelling and pronunciation. I've given you 3 cognates there, and I'm going to show you how they're related. Pregnant, cognate, and nation are all related. How do I know that they're related? They share a common ancestor. They share a root. I reserve the word root. People use this in morphology, but root is a diachronic term, meaning it's a historical, we're looking at the historical word. They share a common ancestor. Here's the morphology or the structure of this word. The CO is a prefix, it means with. The GN is the base element that carries the denotation, it means born. And then the ATE is a common suffix we see in educate, cognate, syllabicate. We put it on the end of words. How do I know GN comes from a Latin past participle? I'm not going to pronounce it in Latin. I don't speak Latin, but it's GNATUS. The AT in Latin is a stem suffix. The US is a I want to say it's an inflectional suffix, it's a suffix, it's common. So if we follow that back, we have cognate comes from this gnatus. I'm following the history of the word. If I follow that word to its other derivations in English, I can follow that linguistic bloodline up to the word pregnant. If you're pregnant, you're before born. The literal denotation of the word, right? PRE, before, GN, born. Okay? And if you're a cognate, you're born with. So cognates are words that are born with each other or have a common ancestor. The analogy is like a family tree, right? These are like cousins in the family tree. Okay, pregnant and cognate. Cognates because they share a linguistic bloodline, that GNATUS. I'm giving you the background, and we're gonna get to the practical side here shortly. Okay, before Romans and Greeks, there were people that lived on Earth. There was a group of people called the Indo-Europeans. Their language was spoken. It was not written down. This guy, Sir William Jones, he was a lover of words, a philologist. He went with the East India Trading Company, so he spent some time in India, and he was analyzing the languages of Sanskrit and some of these other languages. He found patterns in the language, and he said, hey, all these languages, they're related to each other. And he has lots of scientific evidence or evidence within the language through comparative linguistics. That's kind of how comparative linguistics was born. And then scientists were able to sort of reconstruct these roots, okay, based on lists of words and patterns from other languages, okay? The language that they spoke was Indo-European. We have these italicized roots in Proto-Indo-European, so they weren't spoken. That's how he tells us in his dictionary. This is a dictionary entry that I've copy-pasted. Anything in italics, not an English word. Okay? There's also a star to show me that that's reconstructed, or an asterisk. Okay? So it's a Proto-Indo-European, meaning give birth, beget. So we're going to trace it back. Cognate, pregnant, we know they share that. So we can trace that back all the way back to Proto-Indo-European to this reconstructed root, GEN, with an upside down E. I'm not going to say schwa. It's not a symbol. It's a characteristic. Okay. We can trace that linguistic bloodline, and we can see it went up through Germanic. Proto-Germanic, another language reconstructed, up to Old English, which gives us the modern English word kin. So if you're kin, you can think about kin, born, family members, right? Okay. So again, another cognate. This word kin is not spelled the same. It does not sound the same. So a list with a T chart of cognates for my dual language learners is not necessarily going to work. So what do we do instead? We're going to look at a color legend. On one side, dictionary entries of related words that I prepared using the dictionary. I pulled these words from social studies content. We were studying about, I think we were doing light and science. And so I pulled, someone had asked about camera, I pulled the word camera. Okay, so that's just where these words came from. You can do this activity with a plethora of word families. I just chose this one. The header entry, it has the little OE symbol. All of his header entries are in present day English. So you'll see them bolded, you'll see the part of speech, you'll see it as you go down each entry. They're all bold, those are all present day English words. So the first thing I do with my students is I say, okay, camera is a present day English word. I would have my students color over the label with a green colored pencil or crayon. We're going to label it green. Okay, so I label that green. I'm going to go to the back side. I'm going to look at my timeline. This is a vertical timeline. Timelines are great visual references for kids. You can connect them horizontally, but also I just turned this so you can talk about horizontal and vertical. But it's a timeline. So we're going to trace this word. We're going to find the word camera. It's the one at the top in the middle. I would have them color this box in green. This is a system of scaffolding. This chart is an approximate chart. It is not something I would hand my history professor for a grade. This is for kids, okay? and specifically 5th grade kids. I would not do this necessarily with younger kids without a lot of practice with morphology first, with just one word. This is designed for 5th graders that have had practice. So you as an educator are empowered to think about how you might scaffold some of this stuff for kids that you work with. So camera's green. I'm going to go back to my entry and I'm going to read the first thing. The first thing is not an apartment number. It is not an address. It says 1708, and I'm going to have my kids tell me what that means at some point. I'm going to circle that date. It's the first date of attestation. That means it was the first date that Doug found or other scientists found that this word came into English in written form. So it's the date of attestations when it first came into English. Sometimes there are approximations. Sometimes you get a year like this. That's kind of cool, 1708. I'm starting to think what was going on in the world in 1708. That's just kind of going on in the back of my head. In the meantime, I'm going to turn it back over and I'm actually going to write that date. If I were to draw a line, it's approximated towards 1700. So I'm going to write 1708 there. That's my date of attestation. And now I'm going to go back. I'm going to keep going through my entry nice and slow with my students. Okay. We see some quotation marks. The quotation marks are telling us what that word meant at the time it came in 1708. It meant a vaulted building, an arched roof or ceiling. That's interesting to me, because what do we think of as a camera today? I think of my iPhone. How does an iPhone have a huge dark room around it or a vaulted building? How did it go from this meaning to this meaning that we have today? That's the story of the word, right? That's the meaning piece. That's the interesting part of etymology. All right, the next word we see is the most important word in the dictionary that we can either underline or we can shade another color. It's from. Every time in the dictionary, it's consistent. Every time you see that word from, we're taking a step back in history or a step down our vertical timeline. So it says from Latin. I'm gonna label this because I don't have a colored pencil. I'm gonna label it red. We're gonna do Latin red. So from Latin, and you see it italicized. That was the word in Latin that it came from, camera, which meant a vaulted room. Okay, we're seeing a little bit of a sense change, but not much. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my chart now, and I'm going to trace that word all the way down to Latin, some approximation of Latin in time. Again, not for a history professor. We're approximating history here. And we're going to color that red. So now I have a green box and a red box. I'm going to go back, and I'm going to look, and I'm going to keep reading. I see a parenthesis. Parentheses, extra information. He's giving me some cool extra information. This word from Latin camera is also the source of the Italian word, the Spanish word, and the French word. Pronounced chambre in French, I believe. I don't speak French, but that's interesting. Okay. And then he's got that, what word is that again that we see? The word from. I can circle it. I know I'm going where? Back in history. I'm going to step back in history one more time, and this word actually came from Greek. And I'm going to use blue or a light blue for Greek. Here's my color legend for a bunch of different languages. Doesn't matter the color. The idea is the color coding is a scaffold to support the learning, which you can eventually take away. Okay. And then he tells you what that word in Greek meant even before Latin. So vaulted chamber, anything with an arched cover, which is of uncertain origin. That means we're not going to trace this word all the way back to Proto-Indo-European. We just get to Greek. We're in Greek. That's enough. Should have something that hopefully looks like this. I'm going to go through the next one the same way. I have a present-day English. I'm going to color code it green. We're going to follow an I do, we do, we do, we do, we do, and do, and do, and a lot. I'm not even going to a you do. It's just we do it a lot. Then you're going to do it with your partners. You're going to do it in a station. It's we. Everything in learning connected. We're building language structures. We're building language experience. We're allowing kids the time to work together and have those experiences. All right, so I'm going to go through chamber. I have mid-13th century. Just a couple quick things about the mid-13th century. He's not giving me a 1708 date. He's just giving me an approximation here. Again, so I can go back to my chart and I can say mid-13th, and I can go through each entry. Okay, etymologically, a person who manages a chamber or chambers. By the time the word reached English, it had evolved into an important role, blah, 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 blah. There's a lot of extra information here. And I'm going and I'm finding that word from because I know that word from is taking me back in history. I skipped over that extra information because I'm making a point. I have an objective with my students. I'm scaffolding. I have a point. I want to get there. Let's, we got from Old French. So I'm going to do that one purple. From Old French, he gives me the word. I'm going to find the word. I'm going to color that one in purple. And we're following it back. So then we have going back further from a Germanic source. That's really cool. We have a Germanic influence here that we can color orange. And then we're going to get to the point. So we're going to keep going from Latin. That's my connection. If I were to draw a line, I should have two entries that are red. Red, red. That's the connection. They share that root. You can see the linguistic bloodline on the chart. The lines are connected. That's the linguistic bloodline. That's showing that camera and chamber are cognates, cousins, relatives, specific terminology, cognates. Okay. Okay, and then I would go through and I would have each one colored. Okay, and this is what it looks like when they're done. What students are going to do when they pick up the pattern, I don't care if they do this, this is cool, is they'll see the top word and they'll color the top word green all the way across. I'll know that they've done that because they haven't color-coded the entries. It's a requirement in my classroom to color code the entries because this is what's telling me that you understand the tool. This is my objective, that you can use this dictionary and understand this dictionary, not that you can color code pretty pictures. Okay. I've highlighted a couple things on the chart. The chart is useful for historical context. There's two really cool things that I'm seeing in this chart. The first one is over here, and I have a blue circle around it. Right around 1060, notice these two words came from Old French. Right around 1066, this guy who was English, but he was raised in France, William, he invaded England. He was French speaking. William the Conqueror he became. Okay, he took over England and he instituted French to his entire court. So if you were literate in 1066 for the next 100 years, you were speaking French. Common people spoke Germanic languages, English, Old English. So what happened was this French influence on English came in, and we've got these words that reflect that French influence. That is a high school, college, post-grad historical context. There's another historical context that's more relevant for students that we have in 4th and 5th and 6th grade, which is this one in the 1590s. What's happening in the 1590s for social studies? We're talking about the age of exploration. So in my head, this is all completely false and fantastical. It's a fantasy, is that one ship of Spanish speakers was traveling and they're ready to plant their flag in some unknown territory, yelling across the ocean at the Portuguese speakers, and all of them are yelling this word at each other, and that's how the languages are mixing. That's completely a fantasy. But that's what I imagine in my head. And that's not too far off from the language mixing that's going on during the ages of exploration. That is the social studies context. You also have a context with camera and light, and so you can see that connection, where that connection can go for science, art. We want to expose to art and to other subjects as well, and we can do that in our classrooms cross-connecting. Okay, grapheme choice. This is the part where I start to get real scientific. Okay, there are connections with these words. Letters are not functionally representing sound. A letter's job doesn't always have to represent a speech sound. It can do other jobs. One job of a letter is to be part of a grapheme that spells a phoneme that can then be articulated in speech. Okay? The C in camera is related to the CH in chamber, which is related to the CH in Chamberlain, which is related to the C in comrade. Comrade's an interesting word because it actually was sort of a misspelling with the O, and I'll talk about that in just a sec, but the C, the CH, and the C. The A is preserved across. Why is it not preserved in comrade? Because there was a mistake made where they thought the COM was a prefix. Possibly. I'm not saying that is certainly they thought it was a prefix, but when you think about a comrade, a roommate, it would make sense, room with, that COM is a prefix. So there was some mistakes there, but the O, if you look at a vowel quadrilateral, an O does share a relationship with A more than an A would share a relationship with, say, a U. And you can see that with father and ball, so you can see sort of that relationship. They travel on these vectors. Okay, but key point, etymology drives the graphemes, regardless of the pronunciation. You have an A, that's the grapheme that's spelling A, and you have an A that's spelling the vowel glide A. It doesn't matter, the spelling is consistent. It's still spelled with an A, regardless of the pronunciation. All right, so where does this fit? I'm not against anything, but I am for morphology. I am for etymology. Where would Chamberlain, chamber, camera, and comrade fit on these language of layers that I've seen in lots and lots of different education resources? I'm not sure that camera, is it Anglo? It's not really a short everyday word the way it's described in the Anglo-Saxon part. I just think that this to the left is a little more precise and allows for more connections. The more connections that we can make for our students, the better they do. Okay, so that is the etymology. Here's some student work just to show what it looks like. I'm not looking for correctness. I'm looking to build understanding. I'm not looking for the right answer. You see that some of the entries are sort of color-coded, and this is after a lot of practice. You will still see mistakes. It's okay. Because the dictionary is consistent, we can always go back to it and build from where you're at. Okay, so English spelling to me includes patterns to be discovered, not memorized. Structures. We've studied one of the little structures in the framework of orthography. We studied etymology. And I'm going to come back to that. I want to go back to morphology now. Everyone's okay with that? Let's talk about morphology. I go to morphology before I do etymology. So we're back on our framework. How's the word built? I'm no longer looking at words this way in morphology. I'm not looking diachronically. I'm not looking at the history of the word or where the word comes from. I'm looking at the words this way. The structure of words we have today, right now. What's a morpheme? Okay, here's the definition I keep seeing recycled in education. The smallest meaningful unit in a language. That's a problem for me, that word meaning, again, nondescript. We think of meaning, or I think of meaning typically as having a definition, right? That becomes problematic when dealing with morphology, because how do you define the? How do you define an ED? Like in walked or talked or played or jumped? Well, here's the linguistics definition. The minimal distinctive, I love that word distinctive, unit of grammar. The smallest functioning unit. In other words, it's telling me that a morpheme has a job to do. It's got to function somehow. Okay? So when I look at the, I see that it's an article. It's functioning as an article. It precedes a noun. If you want to test a syntactic test, you put the in front of a word. If you can't follow it with that word's probably not a noun. Okay? How do you define ED? Its function. It has multiple functions. It can be a past tense, like walked or talked or played or jumped. It can also be adjectival. The talented Scott Mills, right? Talented, that ED, it's adjective, right? So we can define units of grammar in terms of their functions or their jobs. So one job of an ED is to blah, 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 blah. And that's the language I'm using with students. Okay, how do we construct meaning? This is where some real fundamental differences come between this work and common phonology first approaches. An element is a written morpheme. I'm making the distinguishing spoken language from written language. So a written morpheme is an element. An ED is a written element. It will always be ED. That form won't change. What does change? The pronunciation of it. Walked. There it's pronouncing t. Played. There it's d. At the end of words, it's typically schwad, right? And it's unstressed. Mark did a good job kind of elaborating on stress. English is stress timed, not syllabically divided, the way that Latin or Spanish is. Okay? So written language now, we're in writing. We're not in spoken language. A base element, an element that contains the denotation. Here's some examples of base elements. Every word, every single word either is a base element or has a base element. Some have multiple base elements. Okay? This is my multisensory symbol when I'm talking to my students about base. It's solid. It's there. It's contained in every word. So we have PLAY and JECT. Obviously, those two are not the same base. They're not the same type of base. We can further subcategorize. Play is a free base. Why is play a free base? Free base element. It's a free base element because it stands alone as a word. I play games. JECT, not a word on its own. So a base that stands alone a word. Here's a couple more examples, play and graph. Here's the other one, bound base element. JECT, why is it bound? Because it needs another morpheme to make it a word. Inject, deject, reject, rejection, injection, dictionary. All of these words, they need other elements to make them words. They're called bound base elements. Okay, I'm still using this. Now I'm using this as a form of multisensory. I have affixes on either end that are going to make it a word. Okay, so those are bound base elements. I'm also color coding here for scaffolding. It's not a root. They're not roots. This becomes problematic because catty came from cat, which are both present day English words. Okay, that could be a root. Cat is the root of catty. But root is diachronic. It's looking at etymology. It's not looking at the structure of the word as it is today. So none of these are roots. Bound base element, free base element, they're not roots. A root would be like that Latin gnatus that we looked at. That's a root. Okay. From there we have affixes. Really complex terminology that I'm using, and I'm going through it very quickly. I understand that. Affix. Give new sense and or change the grammar. They're by definition, they're bound. What's an affix? Well, it fixes on to other things. Okay, so we have morphemes that fix on. Prefixes, most people are familiar with these. RE and UN are examples. They're going to fix on to other elements. We also have suffixes, ED, ION, they attach on the other side of the base at the end. Okay. Finally, we have connecting vowel letters. This is where that definition of morpheme comes back, because people always ask me, well, what is an O by itself? It's constructing meaning. It's part of the construction of the meaning of the word. Okay? It connects a base to another base or a suffix. We're going to go through examples of these too. But here's an example. The O in geography is a connecting vowel letter. I'm going to talk a lot about this word, but I'm actually not going to do geography. It follows the same pattern as biography. So we're going to, that O in biography, it's a connecting vowel letter. Okay, none of this is mine. This is all real spelling. I'm going to get you those websites. So we're constructing meaning. If we synthesize with this, we're going to put these elements together. I do that through a word sum. Word sums have plus signs. It's not math. It's not the same thing because what's on this side will not always equal what's on this side. Sometimes you're going to have a convention where you double a letter. Sometimes you're going to replace an E, like in loving, when you add that ing, you replace the E. Okay? We'll talk about that in just a sec too. And analysis is the other way, loosening words. Or breaking, sometimes we refer to this as breaking words apart. That terminology, I don't mind. Meaningful, the other way. So we can look, this is powerful because what do kids see in text? They see this. They don't see that. They see the word with what we call polysyllabic words. They see this. But if they understand that FUL is a suffix, that's going to help them with reading. Seeing those word parts in little chunks rather than a huge chunk is going to help them as you start to, oh, I see the word mean. Well, meaningful must come from mean. It's built on mean. So we're building, we're loosening, we're connecting. Okay, so every word has a base element. Here's my example, biography. Here's one hypothesis. This is the science behind it. One hypothesis is BIO plus GRAPH plus Y, where the GRAPH is a base element, a free base element. Okay? Bio, you'll see it in dictionaries, is often referred to as some sort of combining form prefix or some other definition. Okay? Here's another hypothesis. BI plus O plus GRAPH plus Y. BI is bold. It's bold because it's a base element. How do I know it's a base element? The word biome. If every word has to have a base, what's the base of biome? Well, BI plus OME. BI means life. It's from Greek. The OME also comes from Greek. That suffix has a history, it came from somewhere, has an etymology, and we have words like rhizome and carcinoma and glaucoma. It's used in science. So that OME is a suffix, that leaves BI as the base. This is my scientific evidence for this word sum, where the O is actually a connecting vowel letter. It's often used in Greek, photography, biography, geography. Okay? So connecting vowel letters help in the construction of meaning. I talked a lot about suffixing conventions. I'm going to briefly go through. There's only 3 in English, and none of my suffixing conventions have anything to do with spoken language. Okay? Here's my first example. If we had 2 hours, this is what I typically do in 2 hours, is I have everybody write out these word sums. I'm going to shorten that. So, number 1. We know that the correct spelling doubles that consonant. We know that swimming is spelled SWIMMING. How do I know that? Because number 1, ing is a vowel suffix. That means it starts with a vowel letter, a single vowel letter. I think I don't know of any double vowel digraphs in a suffix. Okay, so it's a vowel suffix. If your students don't know vowel and consonant, you have to go back. You can't start with suffixing conventions if your students don't know what a vowel is. Okay, so how do I do this with little kids? Teach them the alphabet. I mean, that's kind of the best I can give you. Vowels and consonants are important. Some of my 4th and 5th graders didn't know vowels and consonants when they got to me. So I understand the struggle to get there. Ing, vowel suffix, base, single consonant letter, preceded by a single vowel letter. You will see the opposite of that in, which one's not, that has a vowel digraph? 6, speedy. Y is considered a vowel in suffixing. How do I know? Because the R in starry doubles. Okay, so speedy, we have a vowel digraph. Double E here. That's a digraph, 2 letters. So I'm not going to double the D. It's got to be single. Here's the criteria. The suffix has an initial vowel letter, 1 consonant letter finally in base, single vowel that precedes the consonant. No short vowel sound. I'm not talking about spoken language. I'm talking about what's there written in front of me that I can see. Here's the piece. This comes out of the other resource that I have available, infographics for educators. I made graphics. I use this graphic with my students constantly, every day, with studying spelling. Every time we study this, the visual is there. It's not something that they should memorize. We're building the understanding through patterns. Here's the second one. We're going to give you the criteria. We're going to change Y to I unless. Always change, this is opposite. Always change Y to I unless Y is part of a digraph. OY, EY, UY, AY. I don't know of an IY. I don't think that exists. So AY, EY, OY, UY. If the final synthesis will have a double I, like in flying, I'm not going to change that Y to an I because I would have a double I and there's no English words with double I. I know what you're thinking. What about skiing? Ski is not an English word, it's Norwegian. We borrowed it. We took it from Norwegian. Okay? Kids want to know that. What about skiing? Yeah, well, okay. We could talk about that. Etymology. Another reason to study etymology, right? And then finally, the elements form compounds. Compound word, more than one base element. So biography, compound, there's more than one base element. Here we have anything, haywire, toy boat, we're not changing that Y. We're preserving the base elements that are there. Okay, finally, last one is sort of the easy one. You're always going to replace the single final non-syllabic E. It's a replaceable E. You're going to replace it with a vowel suffix. You're not if it's not. So loving, we replace it. Lovely, we don't. The difference between a vowel and a consonant here. Same convention, examples, non-examples, highlighting those patterns. Okay, we can take all these morphemes that we have, compile them like this. We can take them on note cards and do multisensory things with morphemes with kids that struggle. We can make this very multisensory. We can practice doing word sums within the same family because that structure is going to be consistent. Perfect. Okay, so here's an example. I could take POLY as a prefix. There's two things I want to notice about my morphemes that are written on the board that I just realized. You see those little angle brackets around them? Really critical. It's a scientific linguistic notation. It's telling me I'm going to spell whatever's inside of it. I'm not going to say graph. I'm going to say GRAPH instead. I'm spelling it out. Okay, it's different than the slash brackets, which represent phonemes, or the square brackets, which represent phones. Okay, I'm not going into phonology there, but the angled brackets represent spelling. So I have everything in angled brackets because my students will recognize those angled brackets and they'll know, okay, I have to spell this. I can't just say graph. Okay, there's a difference. Okay, so I can take POLY and I can add GRAPH and I can sit here, we can sit here for 3 weeks with just these morphemes. We can talk about meaning. Our jobs as educators, the deeper we go, the better we're building understanding. It's not just a spray and then hope that everybody gets it. You saw where I was going with that. So we want to be consistent, but we want to be going deep. Lots and lots of word lists that are out there in our curriculums and our textbooks. They have these big, broad word lists. It's not our job as educators to go broad. We want to go deep because we're solidifying the structures. So the repetitive routines where you're talking about a word on Monday and then you're coming back to it on Thursday and Friday, you're giving them that chance to have that repetition to reinforce consistently. Okay, so I could spend 3 weeks on this. I could come back to it in a month, whatever. What's not changing? The plus signs, the rewrite arrow, the square, the angled brackets. Okay, that's not changing. There's a handful of suffixes in English, there's a handful of prefixes in English, and we're pretty much looking at the base elements. Okay? Here's a really organized way to look at this. So I could have all of these elements and scatter them around on note cards, or I could just look at a matrix. I have a base element in the middle. Here's my prefixes organized. Here's my suffixes organized. Okay, and I can go here and I can synthesize, put together. I can take a bunch of these words, make the word list and have them analyze. I can go back and forth both ways. Okay, so this is the simple matrix of this base element. Here's a little more complex, right? We have a whole bunch of prefixes with this word, and look at all the derivations that we can get. The word matrix is related to mother. A lexical matrix is pregnant with words. I've heard that before. That's not my own saying. Steal. But you can think about all the derivations, right? Graphically, graphs, graphing, grapheme, graft. And then you've got digraph, epigraph, paragraph, tract, all these words that are within one word. And guess what? The meaning, it's not really changing. There's little shades of meaning that we can talk about, but really all of these are going to have something to do with right. That denotation of that base element. An autograph, writing about self. A biograph, something written about life. There we go. Geography, the study of earth, GE, earth. Orthography, studying correct. That ORTH means right or correct. Orthography, studying what we think of orthography is really spelling. How do we spell? Okay, but the structures are consistent. All right, base elements are in bold. That's how I know that that's a compound autograph, because the base elements are bolded. Vertical lines in the matrix. What do those represent? Plus signs. They're the joins. So if I were to go here, graph Ali, and skip this morpheme, I've just made a word that's not really a word. So I don't want to skip my joins. They're called joins or plus signs. Okay, and those are verticals. Kids do that all the time. It's okay. We can show them, hey, maybe next time don't skip the joins. Okay, I'm looking for understanding. I'm not looking for the correctness mongering. Okay, so here's an example of one that skipped the joins. Trigraphally, not a word. Here's a good test for kids. Is it a word? Is it not a word? If a student can use a word in a sentence, it's probably part of their lexicon. If a student can't use the word in a sentence, even if it is a word, it's not in their vocabulary. Something you got to teach, right? It's not there. It's not a word. Go back and use the words that we've talked about. I don't isolate words like this. I don't just start with word matrices. I start with vocabulary. Language starts, the word level of language is a really good starting point. So if we start at a word, we can look at the sublexical structures, but we can also look at the suprasegmentals and talk about phrases and clauses and paragraphs, but it all starts with that word level, okay? And then we look at those sublexical structures. So if I have a kid who's never seen this before, I'm going to start with a word like instruct or destruct, and I'm going to stick with that first. I'm going to show them pictures, examples, non-examples, some sort of multi-sensory piece with destruction or something like that, to build the language from there. And then I'm going to look at those sublexical structures. Okay, look at how this word is built. That's why that first question is, what does it mean? We can spend a lot of time doing Freyer models. I use Kate Kinsella. She's really good with vocabulary and ELL, but she has a whole routine that you can look at. So English spelling, to me, these were the 3 words that I wrote down. It's always orderly, it's always meaningful, it's always regular. I've given you the denotation of each of the base elements. Here is the structure of orderly, ORD plus ER plus LY. Here's some cognates. When I do my etymology trees, I came up with harmony, articulate, and ornate. Love that, nice and positive. Meaningful, related to, it has the denotation of think, which is a huge family, but mind, music, museum, mental, mosaic. Okay, more connections. And then regular, this is really cool because regal and regent are Latin, and correct is Latin, royal is French, and right is Germanic. So you have all the little languages represented. That's super nerdy, but this is what I think of when I think of spelling, and this is what I want to convince you of, that spelling is not just some crazy thing that we've thrown together. Okay. Resources, languageinterviews.com is my website. Gina Cook is linguisteducatorexchange.com. I have a couple of her matrix resources upstairs that I've co-authored with her. Edom Online is the dictionary. Realspelling.fr, that's really, really deep studies into Latin and Greek. And another guy, Pete Bowers, he does a lot of research. So if you're interested in what empirical evidence supports this is a good website, wordworkskingston.com. He has videos, he's got research articles, his brother has articles. They're the PhDs that I'm stealing from, okay? Thank you so much, Decoding Dyslexia. Thank you guys for coming.